So yeah, good evening again, everybody, and good evening, especially to those who are joining us online. My name's Toby Story. I'm the owner of Southern Sea Ventures, and I'm very excited to be here tonight with my good friend and colleague Gary Miller to talk about the Ross Sea. Gary, I'll let you just quick introduction if you'd like, and then I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have worked with Toby quite often, but I've been working in the Antarctic for about 38 years now. I started my Antarctic career doing research. And in fact, 6 summers I did research on Ross Island, where you'll be heading on the trip if you go. And in addition to that, I've done at least a dozen or so other Ross Sea trips, which includes the all the places on the itinerary of which you're going. And so my job tonight is to sort of give you a little bit of a rundown of those places and the kinds of wildlife and experiences you'll see. When I finish with that, Toby will then explain a little bit more about the trip per se and the kayaking aspect of the trip and a bit about the ship and the details and that sort of thing. But I'm here mainly to talk to you about the wildlife.
That's fantastic. Yes, I wish I could tell you how many years I've been kayaking in the Ross Sea, but of course, this will be the first year that we've offered, and I think my understanding is, as far as we know, it is the first ever sort of dedicated kayak program in the Ross Sea.
Yeah,
So yeah, so the kayaking pictures will be limited from the Ross Sea until next year.
yeah.
Um, yeah, but yes, as Gary said, I'll give a little bit of a rundown on the trip and what to expect towards the end. And but for now, I might Gary, I might share the presentation for you to get started.
Okay.
Here we go. Oop. And I'll flick back to the very beginning.
Oh yeah, let's start at the beginning.
Yeah. Sneak preview, everybody.
There we go. That's
Okay.
the
All right.
beginning.
Gary, I'll let you take it away and yeah, just let me
Okay, I'll give my signal for changing the picture. So if you can see now, what I've got is a map of the whole of the continent of Antarctica on the right-hand side, and there's a ellipse down in the bottom there, and that's the area of Antarctica in which the trip will be going. And on the left-hand side is, unfortunately, it's turned upside down in comparison to that. Sorry, that wasn't a signal there, Toby.
That's okay.
And that was just a hand gesture. It's upside down compared to the other map, but it has New Zealand at the top where you start and you go down. And basically, there are two regions that you'll be visiting on the trip. One is the subantarctic islands, and I'll start by going through that. And you'll visit Snares, Auckland, Campbell, and Macquarie Island. Weather permitting, of course, in all of these cases. And then the other part of it is the Ross Sea area, which kind of starts at the Bellini Islands, but really doesn't start until Cape Adare. But starting at the Bellini Islands and farther south, it's truly Antarctic, whereas right up until Macquarie Island, it's subantarctic, and Macquarie Island's covered with lovely vegetation. So let's go ahead and get started then. When you leave, Snares Island isn't very far really from Bluff. And so just be an overnight thing to get to Snares. And but if you're alert and you're out in the decks and such, there's a really lovely diversity of albatrosses to be seen. And here's just three of them. A royal albatross, they're mainly found on the South Island of New Zealand and some of the subantarctic islands that you'll be visiting. And the shy albatross is probably the most common one in the Southern Ocean over on this sector of it, although you'll see plenty of black-broweds and maybe some yellow-nosed, Atlantic yellow-nosed and bullers, and there's a variety of albatrosses. All right, Toby. Your first stop will be probably Snares Island, as long as weather permits, and you can see on the trip I have illustrated here, we arrived at dawn. And you can see those masses of birds that are flying there. Those are all albatrosses, not just any little seabird. Those are all albatrosses. They're Buller's albatrosses, which Snares is one of the main places where they nest. And there's there's tens of thousands of Buller's albatrosses nesting on Snares Island. Where you get off the ship and do cruising. Now, Snares is a special place because no one is allowed to land there unless you have a special scientific permit. So an experience kayaking there is going to be just the same as the experience that everyone else gets because they're going to have to be cruising in Zodiacs. So in this case, you're you should go in the kayaks because you're getting essentially a similar experience. Although you do have to work a little bit for it, compared to sitting quietly in a motorized Zodiac. But Snares is such a place because it has unique wildlife. Something's happening. Okay, my printer just came up. All right. It has unique wildlife. And in the lower left there, the Snares crested penguin. That's the only place in the world where you can find Snares crested penguins. You might be able to spot an erect crested penguin there or a Fiordland crested penguin there. But with the Buller's albatrosses and such, then there's lots of unique wildlife. And there's also a million or so sooty shearwaters there, which in New Zealand they call mutton birds. In Australia we call mutton birds. They're the short-tailed shearwaters we call mutton birds. But the mutton birds from New Zealand, and as a consequence, the entire island is just Swiss cheese, the land on it. So it's dangerous for anyone to go ashore, dangerous for the wildlife, not for the people per se. So it's a fantastic place to be able to visit and to see it from the water side. And as you can see, most of the action is down at the waterside anyway. So in the two upper photos are the main, that's the penguin slope, it's called. That's the main landing spot for Snares crested penguins. And there's other things like caves and little inlets and things that you can get into. And you can get surprised by, oh, there's an endemic tomtit on the islands. And I even saw a Canada goose there once, which is an odd thing. I was quite surprised, but then once I started reading about it, I found out, oh, they're regular visitors. But quite interesting with the wildlife there at Snares. After the Snares, the itinerary has you going down to Auckland Island, which is the next sort of large island down. And on the left-hand side, you can see a map of the island. And up in the top, there's a little box called Enderby Island, where there's Enderby Island. So that and Port Ross is one place that you'll certainly try to go to because it's a fantastic area for cruising both in Zodiacs and in kayaks. And possibly down in Carnley Harbor, far down in the south. That's another great place to be able to paddle. Auckland has some nice wildlife. The shag there in the upper right-hand picture is the Auckland Island shag. So it's a unique shag. And there's also all of these subantarctic islands have specific wildlife that is only found on the island. So there's an Auckland Island teal, and there's an Auckland Island shag, and there's an Auckland Island tomtit. In the lower picture on the right-hand side, you can see there's also a beautiful rata forest. Now, it is an excellent place to cruise, but at the Auckland Islands, especially on Enderby Island, it's conceivable that you'd be able to make a landing there. And if you do, then you can walk in amongst that forest, but you can see where the Zodiacs are there is a great place along the shoreline. And all of the pictures in this screen here have been taken from the water. So you can see all of this stuff well from the kayak. But if you go ashore, there is a boardwalk path that goes across the island, and you can take a walk with the guided group from the ship and go all the way around the island and probably see royal albatrosses nesting and that sort of thing. Yellow-eyed penguin is also a very rare penguin, probably the considered the most rare penguin in the world, but that might actually be the Galapagos nowadays, the Galapagos penguin. But it's a fantastic place, and the sea lions on the right-hand side are hooker sea lions or New Zealand sea lions. They're now generally referred to as New Zealand's. And there's a big colony on Enderby Island, and they'll be there and be quite active. They will have already given birth to their pups in January by the time the trips come that go there, but they are still around, and the pups are there, and they still have a kind of a harem aspect to them, and even in January. Now, Campbell Island, as I'm sort of doing this in regions, probably Campbell Island is a place that you're going to visit on the return trip after you've finished in the Ross Sea and you're coming back. And it's the farthest south of the New Zealand subantarctic islands. It's the picture in the upper left there shows there's a lovely boardwalk walk. And if you have the capability of doing that, that's one thing that you probably will want to do that's not kayaking. And that's going up to what's called Mount Lyell and to the Call. And the reason for going there is that the boardwalk goes quite near several of these royal albatross nests, and you can see them. And if you're lucky, and I know that in January it often happens, there's also little groups dancing and displaying to each other with their wings held out, and they just go all completely out, and they make clacking noises, and they pair up, and so you can watch those sort of things. Campbell Island has a shag of its own, and it also has a snipe. So they're also, if anyone's interested in birds and per se, it's the only place in the world to see these ones. Along the shore, though, or walking still, sorry, it has spectacular vegetation. You probably won't see much of the vegetation that's like this on Auckland Island, but in Campbell Island, it has this what's called megaherb vegetation, and it's got Macquarie Island cabbage, this Stilbocarpa polaris, and there'll be flowers around in January, and that's obviously a plant that is also found on Macquarie Island, which we'll get to next. But the mega herbs are fantastic. There are a few places where there are trees on Campbell Island, but it's pretty far south, and so it only is in more or less protected areas of it. And one of the interesting historic things about Macquarie Island, Campbell Island, is that there was a settlement there, and there was actually cattle on the island for a while. And one of the settlements, they planted a Sitka spruce, this giant tree that is native to Alaska in North America. And it's still growing there, and they consider it the loneliest tree in the world because the rest of the vegetation that's there isn't considered trees, it's considered bush instead. And so it's considered to be the only tree on Campbell Island. There are also hooker sea lions there, and there are also elephant seals that visit there. They're a little bit harder to spot compared to when you go to visit Macquarie Island, but they're there. And again, these images are, except for the upper right one, these are all taken from the water. So things that you can see from your kayaks as you're paddling in the lovely bays and such of Campbell Island. On your way down, according to the itinerary, and this might change, it might change according to weather and conditions, according to your expedition leader, but you'll visit Macquarie Island on the way down as a last stop. And Macquarie Island is, of course, Australian instead of New Zealand, and it has a research station there. The upper left-hand corner shows that. Now, as far as I know, and I'm pretty sure it's true, that even since COVID, the station is closed, so you won't be allowed to go into the station environs and have a look around at the station. And the same is true when you get down to Ross Sea, both the New Zealand station and McMurdo station, the US station. In the past, prior to COVID, it was possible to have a visit at those stations, but nowadays, since COVID, they've just shut them and don't allow ships who might be bringing something like COVID or flu or something in. But you can still visit the land there on Macquarie Island, land near the station and at a place called Sandy Bay. And there's a third place called Lusitania Bay, which has cruising only. So you either get in Zodiacs or in your kayaks. And around the islands, there are other fur seals. So New Zealand fur seal, or now called the long-nosed fur seal. And the one in the upper right is called the subantarctic fur seal. So that, and of course, there's tens of thousands of elephant seals on Macquarie Island as well. But Macquarie Island has king penguins and quite good numbers of them. For those of you who may have visited Antarctica already, especially if you've gone to South Georgia, oftentimes Macquarie Island is called a mini South Georgia because it has a tremendous diversity of wildlife, but it also has, as you can see in these few images, quite large colonies for penguins. And one of the magical things about Macquarie Island, and I really, really would love to be there myself in a kayak, because the king penguins at Macquarie Island are unlike any other king penguins that I've experienced in South Georgia, in the Falklands, or in even Terra del Fuego, in that they're extremely curious. You see in the upper right, there's a zodiac there, and the king penguins literally swim around. And the lower left picture is from a zodiac, and the penguins actually come right up to you and bounce against the zodiacs, trying to crane their necks to see what's going on in there. So I can imagine being in a kayak. It must be absolutely fabulous to be in the water with these king penguins being curious about who you are and what you're doing. The place that's called Lusitania Bay, where the biggest king penguin colony is not, you're not allowed to land. So again, go in your kayaks when you visit Lusitania Bay. There isn't a walking option. So get in those boats and paddle, because you'll have a more intimate experience with the wildlife when you do that. The other big numbers of penguins on Macquarie Island are another endemic species, the royal penguins. They're very similar, and in fact, some scientists will lump them together with macaroni penguins, but you can see the royal penguins have a white face. They have those lovely, luxuriant crests of yellow feathers on their head, like all the crested penguins do, but they're in these massive, massive colonies there. You can see them from kayaks, but this one of the landing sites at Sandy Bay is a place where you can get ashore, and the upper right and lower left pictures are taken from there. If you get ashore with them, and there's both at the landing site at Sandy Bay, and you should be able to land from your kayaks as well if you're going to do your kayaks. But there's both royal penguins and king penguins, so you can actually get quite close and personal with them on shore and get out your big cameras if you want. I know in kayaks sometimes it's kind of a risky business taking out a nice camera and such. But the royal penguins are very numerous and only found on Macquarie Island. Elephant seals are another big feature there, and they're at all the beaches. They are most numerous earlier in the season, but there'll still be plenty of them there. The one in the upper left is probably more like what you'll see is in January, they start to molt. And so they're mostly large males resting, the females having given birth back in October, maybe in the early part of November. They're already gone to sea and left their pups behind. And so they do leave their pups behind, and the pups are really magical as well. Next picture there.
Sorry, yep.
Yeah, there we go. Just the cutest thing on the planet kind of thing, looking up at you. And this is a picture taken from the shore at Sandy Bay, where I was standing on the rocks, and he came over to me and had a look. You can see a reflection of myself in his eyes. But the elephant seals are fantastic there. There's undoubtedly at least a few males that are still kind of jazzed up enough on their testosterone that there'll be a little bit of fighting going on, a little pushing and shoving. But for the most part, the breeding is finished, and they're all resting and molting. Once you leave Macquarie Island, there is a reasonably long period at sea, 3 to 5 days, depending on conditions. And I would urge you all to get out there, because there's still lots of albatrosses. They go south of the Antarctic convergence into Antarctic waters as long as there's not too much ice. But once you get in and there's ice, then you get snow petrels. That's what the bird in the upper left is there, is snow petrels. And around the Bellini Islands, sort of your first stopping off point in true Antarctic conditions, the snow petrels, most of them are a subspecies that's about 20% larger than the other subspecies. So it's so you're going to see a unique snow petrel at the Bellini Islands itself. Now, the Bellini Islands are really spectacular in the sense that they're very rarely visited. Up until fairly recently, even throughout most of the summer, the Bellini Islands were still encased in pack ice that connects the Bellini Islands to the continent, which is quite a distance. It's a big distance to get down from the Bellini Islands to the continent. It's still about a day and a half of motoring in the ship. So the islands are, you can see there's a group of islands, and I have a couple of red circles and an ellipse there. And those are the most likely places if you manage to get out into zodiacs or kayaks or both. Those are the kinds of places you'll be visiting. The one on the north end is Sabrina Island, which I have a picture of there in the lower left. And then on the south end is Sturge Island, the largest of the islands. At the Bellinis, one of the things that's now you finally reach Antarctic penguins. So the penguins you're seeing in these two pictures, lower left and upper right, are Adelie penguins, and they're the ones that you will mainly see once you get to the Antarctic. There might be some emperors to be seen, and every once in a while there's a vagrant of something else, but mainly it'll be Adelies. But the Bellini Islands also has a small population of chinstrap penguins, and so you'll be able to tick off chinstrap penguins on your list. In fact, there's on the trip, if you're lucky, you can see emperor penguins, king penguins, Adelie, Gentoo, chinstrap, snares crested, royal, erect crested, fiordland crested, and yellow-eyed penguins. So that's 10 species out of the 18 species of penguins you can see on this individual trip. Now, the Bellini Islands is also a good place. Whales, it's a good feeding area for whales. So there's a humpback whale picture there in the lower right. And you can see now you've left the luxuriant vegetation of the subantarctic and are now in the truly Antarctic environment. You can see that there's just a barren ground with snow and ice. And that's the kind of look that the islands have. The islands, all the Bellini Islands, this is another place where you're not allowed to visit unless you have a special scientific permit. But the cruising there is pretty spectacular, both just for the visuals of the islands themselves, and there is still good wildlife there, like Weddell seals and fulmars nesting and Cape petrels nesting, and as I said, humpback whales typically around there in January. As you go farther south, a couple of days south, you finally get into the Cape Adare region. That's the first part of Antarctica, the continent of Antarctica that you'll encounter. And now you're really truly in the Ross Sea region. And of course, now it's just Adelie penguins with an occasional emperor penguin. Here's a map of your landfall. The little red circle is where the big penguin colony is, where the ship will try to go to. Now, the Ross Sea, I've got it listed here, was named by Captain Ross after his friend Viscount Adair. But the Ross Sea is a place where there is a lot of ice, typically, and there's also a lot of wildlife and some very large penguin colonies. But it also has, and this is probably one reason why at least some of you have chosen to maybe do this trip, is it has a huge amount of history involved in the exploration and adventure of exploring Antarctica in the early days, in the heroic age of exploration. And Cape Adare is actually the place where the first hut was built, and that's Borchgrevink's hut. You can see on the upper right there and in the lower left, and the interior of it on the lower right. This the upper left is an aerial view of Cape Adare, and you can see all of that tan stuff in that image is penguin colony. It's a massive, in fact, it's the largest Adelie penguin colony in the world at Cape Adare. And I have in the little red box there says ASPA. That's an Antarctic specially protected area, and the hut is in that. And so you'll be regulated. You can still visit the hut that's there, and it's quite interesting. So this is some of the history. There are 4 other huts. Is that right? No, 3 other huts. This is the 4th hut. There are 3 other huts down on Ross Island that will also be a target for you to try to visit during the trip, and it'll be spectacular to be able to try to do some paddling in some of these areas. Here's a land view of the Adelie penguin. Last surveyed 338,000 nests. So that's pairs. So that's almost 700,000 adults. And if they have 1.5 or so chicks per nest, you're talking about during the January period, there's probably well over 1 million birds at this colony. Coming and going, of course, to feed. And there's also a skua there that is one of the predators of the penguins. And so it's a fantastic place to be able to visit, both for the history and then for the wildlife, because the scale of the wildlife is just mind-numbing, really. It is a difficult place to make a landing. There's typically surf, and there's also good currents around here. So you may not be able to land directly in the colony area, but there's eddy places and stuff that you can probably get around and paddle in amongst some of the ice, which is also pretty spectacular. Of course, the Adelie penguins are the main feature there, and any other place that you make a landing and you see any penguins at a colony, there'll be Adelies in the Ross Sea area. In January, when the trip is traveling and into the early part of February, the Adelie penguins are feeding their chicks, and the chicks are at least as large as the ones that are pictured here. And depending on when you do manage to get there, looking at the schedule, is probably around the 2nd to 3rd week of January, or 3rd week of January. They'll probably be just a bit bigger than this and maybe starting to look a little ratty because they'll be losing their downy coats and getting sort of adult-like feathers. But this is what you'll be seeing. You'll be seeing adults coming with food. You can see in the upper left, that adult has a big bulging belly, and he's got a lot of krill and food for his chicks, and the chicks come running. And so hopefully you have the opportunity to see these feeding chases. And when the adult finally stops on the upper right, he calls down to the chicks to make sure he's got just the right chick, that it's his, and then finally feeds them. Yeah. And those are the kinds of things you'll see there. As you leave Cape Adare, excuse me, and head down into the Ross Sea more, it might be that you, depending on your conditions and your expedition leader, you might visit Terra Nova Bay, and there are several sites in there that are of interest. Nothing is of particular interest with regard to wildlife, although there's Weddell seals, there's Adelie penguins. The lower right picture is a kind of a distant view of an Adelie penguin colony. The place called Inexpressible Island, which is the lowest of the red stars on the upper left image, is a place where the winter party of Scott's expedition in 1912 got stuck because the ship was never able to get back to them to collect them, and they wintered over in a snow cave. So that's one of the stories we don't hear much about, but 6 guys actually spent the winter in a snow cave at Inexpressible Island, which maybe is why it's called Inexpressible.
Here I am complaining about Tasmanian cold.
Yeah, I know. That's it's feeling a bit winter-like.
Yeah.
But there is obviously the snow melts away during the summer, and so the snow cave and the ice cave is no longer there, but they know exactly where the location was, and there's a sign there that's quite eroded, and so I've written in white there what's stated on the sign. So that's another historic spot, even though there's very little to be seen about the history. There are some bones from seals that they ate, so they have signs of being butchered by regular knives and saws and things like that, rather than just dying naturally. So that's a possibility. Also in Terra Nova Bay, the 3 stars at the top of Terra Nova Bay are three research stations, which again, I don't know, in this case, I don't know if they are closed. The farthest south one is the Italian station called Mario Zucchelli, and there's one German station called Gondwana Station, and I forgot the newest one is the one called, it's a South Korean station. In fact, the newest one is not the South Korean one. I forgot about it. Down on an inexpressible island, the Chinese have built one of their stations there. So there's quite a new, less than 5 years old research station on Inexpressible Island as well. As you go south from there, you get right down into the heart of the history of going to the Ross Sea, and that's down to McMurdo Sound. McMurdo Sound is dominated by Mount Erebus. Both the left-hand pictures have Mount Erebus in them, but the one is on top is closer, and you can see also the Ross Ice Shelf, which is another feature that is going to be exciting to be able to see the Great Barrier from the heroic age of exploration of Antarctica. But Erebus most of the time has steam coming out of the vent at the top, and it's one of only two volcanoes in the world that has a active lava lake, a visible lava lake down in the crater. It's quite a distance down from the rim of the crater, but you can see it if you manage to fly over it. The image on the right-hand side on top is almost from the top of Mount Erebus. It was when I was doing research there, I took off in a plane to go back to New Zealand, and they nearly flew right over the top of Mount Erebus. And I got a picture looking down. That peninsula is called Hut Point Peninsula. So if you look in the glare of the sun there, right at the end is where Scott Base and McMurdo Station are currently, but it's also where Scott's 1903 Discovery Hut exists there. So one of the historic huts. There's a glacial ice tongue called the Erebus ice tongue that goes off into the sea there. So there's usually nice big icebergs around, and left of the sun glare in the background of that picture in the upper right is all ice shelf, and it goes like that all the way to the other end of the Ross Ice Shelf, and then goes up to the plateau and to the pole off in that direction. The two lower images are just illustrations to show that even in January, depending on the year, what the winter's been like, you could run into pretty serious ice conditions in the area, and it'll, of course, it'll affect operations, but it's also magnificent stuff to paddle around. If it's open, if there's enough open water, there's no dangerous animals like in the Arctic, like a polar bear walking up to take you out. But it's fantastic to be able to get in either Zodiacs or in kayaks and to go around some of that ice and the big flows of ice. And on the ice, nice little surprises, like there's a couple of emperor penguins off to the right over there, and you'll see them hopefully much better than that, more like, I think it's the next one. Nope, a little bit more ice. Go ahead, Toby. Here we go. There's some emperors there, and that's from the ship, but I think Toby has some shots that it shows that even from the Zodiac, sometimes you can get down, and if you're lucky, depending on the group, you might be able to have a little walk on some of this big ice, and sometimes the emperor penguins come around. One of the other fantastic parts of Ross Sea wildlife is the orcas there. There are lots of orcas in the Ross Sea, and you'll undoubtedly see some groups. There are several different ecotypes there, but orcas is something, and if you're lucky, even the best experience you can hope to have is if you manage to get to go out on a piece of ice and have a walk around. Sometimes the orcas cruise right next to the edge of the ice looking for emperor penguins to prey upon. So don't stand too close to the edge when you do walk on the ice. And there are lots of seals around. The Weddell seal is the most numerous in the Ross Sea area that you'll see, although crabbeater actually is more numerous, but they tend to be in the water and in places where you don't see them as easily. And leopard seals are quite common around the big penguin colonies. So if you get around the big penguin colonies, keep an eye open and you'll see leopard seals as well. And perhaps, I don't know whether you would consider it lucky or unlucky, but perhaps spot one that manages to snag a penguin and eat it before your eyes. And they're probably, I've never heard of any kayakers having trouble with leopard seals. Zodiacs don't generally. Every now and then they puncture one by biting it, but that's not a big deal. But they're not particularly dangerous to people, only to penguins and other seals. Around Scott Bays, you probably get down into the region at least, but the Weddell seals, as I said, were quite numerous because they're visible. They haul out onto the ice, and you can see them scattered all over the place around the area. And I want to make one special mention of the Ross seal. Not every trip gets to see it, but when you go through ice in the Ross Sea, it's one of the most difficult seals. It is the least numerous, but it's still, there's quite a few of them in the population. But it's a seal that you have to be in the Ross Sea basically to spot, the Ross seal. And if the ship goes past one, hopefully the crew will alert everyone, because when you go by, very typical is that posture that he's got where his head is up in the air and he does a kind of a call as a stress call. Go ahead, and the next one is another Ross seal picture. They're easy to tell because of that unique sort of stripe of darker hair that goes from underneath the chin, kind of like a Fu Manchu mustache. But Ross seal, keep your eyes open. Now I'm just going to finish up with a little bit about the 3 historic huts there. So one of which is down at McMurdo, where McMurdo Station is, and it's the farthest one south, and that's this one here, the Scott's Discovery Hut. And it's called the Discovery Hut because the ship he used in his 1903 expedition was the HMS Discovery. And it's a small hut, but I know that the trip's heritage expeditions really tries their best to visit all of these places. And so you might get a chance to get there. And it's quite interesting with the history, and we don't have time tonight, but the historian on board will be able to tell you the details of the occupation and what it was used for and that sort of thing. More importantly, probably to most people, is Scott's other main hut, which is for his 1907 expedition. Go ahead, Toby. And that's the Cape Evans hut, it's called. And it's from his expedition in which he succeeded in reaching the South Pole, but he died along with his 4 companions on the return trip. So none of them were able to get back alive from that. It's quite a big hut, and it's quite magnificent in that the New Zealand group of the Historic Hut Association has done a lot of restoration there. And so you can go in and there are iconic photographs of the laboratory in which Dr. Atkinson used, which is on the upper right there, and the tenements, which is some of the bunks that the officers used in the lower right. And then there's the kitchen in the lower left. And all of this gear is just preserved because it's essentially in a deep freeze. And so it's a spectacular thing. It's quite an open coast there, so it's quite likely that there won't be any paddling for that particular location. But it's still maybe possible, depending on what ice is there. And it's a place, I can warn you about the huts themselves, is that they're regulated in that only, in this case, only 12 people are allowed inside the hut at one time. And at Discovery Hut and at Shackleton's Hut, it's only 8 people at a time. Next picture. We're almost finished with me. And lastly, Shackleton is also a very popular Antarctic figure, and he had a hut that was from 1909, and he, sorry, not from 1909. His hut was from 1905, and he nearly made it to the pole. He got to within 90 kilometers using this Royds hut, and he had lots of people with him, including Sir Douglas Mawson, who is an Australian, who then later did his own expedition to the Antarctic. And it was the first time anyone climbed Mount Erebus from this hut at Cape Royds. So Shackleton's hut at Cape Royds is also a place that can be visited, and it's a tremendous time capsule of what was there. So that does it for me. As Toby said, we'll have a little Q&A at the end. So if you have any other questions about wildlife, I'm happy to answer them. So come and join us. And now Toby will take over and talk a little bit more about the mechanics of things. Thank you.
Fantastic, Gary. Thank you. Thank you. Round of applause.
Yeah,
yeah. It's quite an adventure, quite a trip, and I'm going to go relatively briefly through just some of the highlights as I see it from a paddling standpoint. Obviously this year will be the first year, so it's a 28-day voyage. It's a long voyage. It's a fairly, I guess, a big commitment. We've also got the dates out for 2026, but the kayaking is confirmed for this year, and we already have sign-ups for 2026. So we're very confident that will be happening as well. The kayaking will be happening on the January trips at this point. We've primarily chosen that window due to the temperatures. Later in the season, it's not so much wind or ice conditions, but just the cold adds another dynamic to the paddling. So we've chosen the earlier part of the season. Not that you couldn't go in the later part, but it just, as I said, adds another dynamic to it all. Obviously, this is a partnership, not a Southern Sea Ventures vessel. We provide the kayaking side of things, and we're working in partnership with Heritage Expeditions to deliver this. They've been running expedition cruising voyages down for around 40 years down into this Southern Ocean there, and we've partnered with them over the last sort of 15 years or so to deliver a range of kayaking expeditions to Macquarie Island and the subs, and as I said, this one will be the first one in the Ross Sea. So I'll just flick through just a day-to-day itinerary. I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but just sort of you can see, day one, meeting in Queenstown, then we're transported by bus down to the vessel on day 2, and then you're overnight and you're at the Snares Island. Then you have typically another overnight move with the vessel, and you're in the Auckland Islands. And then you've got another day at sea and a couple of days at Macquarie Island, all things being equal, provided the weather cooperates. And then, of course, a couple of sea days and down into the Ross Sea. And you've got 10 good days to explore and get the different opportunities. Everything's always weather dependent, and nowhere more so than in the Ross Sea and the sub-Antarctics. But that's part of the excitement of it, and sort of playing the weather to our advantage to ensure that that we get the best opportunities that we can. Mainly just sort of pointing out that there are quite a few sea days. It's a long trip, but it's broken up with lots of really great amazing places throughout, and there is no other way that you can do this part of the world. So it's quite the adventure. So I just wanted to throw in a few photos first from the sub-Antarctics. Now this is the Ross Sea webinar, but you have to go through the subs to get there. So that's a really big part of the trip as well, as Gary's kind of pointed out. And so just from my perspective, just wanted to sort of put a few photos up quickly from my last trip down there. The Auckland and Campbell Islands, they really offer these quite beautiful sheltered inlets and bays, very weather-beaten islands, but very dramatic coastline with big cliffs and caves. This is a wonderful little paddle through where you come in or drive through in the Zodiacs, and the whole thing is open above. So you paddle into this little cathedral, and you can see a lovely, I guess, a stalactite of moss, growing off the side here. It's really an otherworldly otherworldly place. There's lots of adventure to be had. Obviously, we're always looking for the sheltered areas, mostly for kayaking, but there is definitely some excitement down there. It's the sub-Antarctic islands, and it's the Southern Ocean, and there's a lot of big swell, so there's always opportunities for excitement as well. I'd just like to throw this in because this was us paddling next to the Snares crested penguin in the Snares. which anyway, that's for Gary because
Yeah.
I got to see him before he did. So, that's my one tick over Gary in the last 20 years of working together from a wildlife standpoint. Gary sort of touched on this, Macquarie Island, the opportunities for paddling are really wonderful. Obviously, the landing on shore and being amongst the penguins, but also paddling amongst the king penguins is something that it's a really fabulous experience. If anyone's been to South Georgia, you may have had that opportunity as well, but it's quite a similar kind of experience on offer here on Macquarie Island. And then, of course, we've got the Bulimia Islands, but once you get to the Ross Sea, now this is not a kayaking photo from the Ross Sea, this is from the Weddell Sea, but they're very similar in the sense that we've got, fabulous tabular icebergs, the wonderful ice edge, and this is where a lot of the activity happens with the wildlife. And as Gary said, getting out amongst the pack ice, and these are all sort of opportunities for really, really great sort of paddling experiences, as well as obviously the Zodiac cruising and more big ice and getting to the Ross ice shelf. I mean, if we were able to do a bit of a paddle along that, obviously all things being equal and weather permitting, that would be fantastic. Just flick through to the next one. And, there's always opportunities with the kayaks to get up close and personal with the wildlife. And as promised, up close and personal with the emperor penguins. This is sort of one of my big tick items, I guess, something that's quite unique for the Ross Sea. And it would be quite an opportunity to paddle with the emperor penguins. And hopefully I'd love to see a couple of them jump in and swim around the kayaks, and that would probably be a lifelong memory for me. And just a little bit on the vessel. It was built specifically for polar cruising. The vessel is built for 180 passengers, but takes a maximum of 140. So it's quite a spacious. It feels quite spacious, very comfortable, and it's got a full fleet of Zodiacs for so everybody can get off all at once. It's pretty quick to get off and on, having been on it myself, and we've operated in up to 30-35 knots of wind easily. So it's versatile. You can operate in a wide range of conditions without issues. Fantastic for the Southern Ocean. Really nicely stabilized. I was really impressed. And after spending a lot of time on smaller vessels with sort of 50 odd passengers, when I got on this, I didn't notice the ocean at all, really. And we did have big seas and big swell. So it rides very nicely. And as I said, it was custom built for polar cruising. So it's an older vessel. It's not a brand new build, but it's still very nicely put together. It's comfortable, it's stylish, it's got a sauna, a gym, it's got a pool, which you're not going to use. It's got a lecture theatre, I hope. It's got a lovely library and reading room. As I said, it's got stabilizers built for polar travel, open bridge, very classic sort of comfort and style on the vessel. But the style of expedition, it really is still very much an expedition cruise. So it does have a really good expedition feel, and that comes from the team. And that's the nature of travel in that part of the world. But the captain and the crew and the expedition team, they understand that and deliver really well. And that's why we're partnering with them for this, because it fits with our style of doing things. Just from the kayaking, obviously a mix of double and single kayaks, primarily doubles, but we do have some single kayaks as well. The program's Zodiac supported when required. So if we need to use a Zodiac to transport us down upwind to do a downwind run, or pick us up, or cover some distance with the Zodiacs to get to the highlights, then we've got that opportunity. Small groups, so up to 10. 8 to 10 is the maximum for the Ross Sea. As you'll have a dedicated Southern Sea Ventures guide. As I said, it's a partnership with Heritage Expeditions, but we're running the kayaking side of things. Now, in terms of the outings are offered, kayak outings are offered at any time that the vessel stops. And so often the question is, how many times will I get to paddle? Every time the vessel is at an anchorage, provided that the conditions are suitable, we'll offer an outing. Some people often want to combine certain things. So as Gary mentioned, some of the hikes, they're really fantastic, really worth getting out and going for a hike. The huts obviously are such a big highlight for people. You need to you have to make sure you go there. It's sort of like a pilgrimage, I guess, if you're going to the Ross Sea. So having the guide there, they will be able to inform, help to guide your decisions about on any given day, when you might paddle or when you might not. So when you sign up for the kayaking, you have access to the kayaking program anytime that you choose. And of course, most people choose to paddle most of the time. But we do understand that there are other things as well other than kayaking on offer. And that's our role, is to ensure that you get the best of both worlds. So that's it from me. Just a really quick summary. What I'll do is I'll open it up to questions. And yes, of course, we've got the trips with kayaking in January. There's the non-kayaking trips in February and March. Southern Sea Ventures, we are able to take bookings for all of those trips, and so even if you're not paddling, we're happy to take your booking and manage that for you as well. So I'll open up the floor to any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, so just back to Gary and I can see the chats coming through. And
there we go.
There we go. So I'm just looking in the chat to see if we've got any. Okay. Any questions at all there? Oh, here we go. Carolyn's just asking about the costs. Just obviously, sorry, for a single and double, is that, Carolyn, if you could just clarify, are you talking about the kayaking side of things, or are you talking about the berths themselves? So I can just talk to the kayak program at this point. Of the berth obviously depends on the berth choice. We've got quite a range from a triple cabin right the way up to the sort of superior cabins. I know that in January there's availability for most categories, and for February it's relatively limited. For the kayaking side of things, there's no supplement for whether you choose a single or double kayak. It's really up to the guide and the ability and your skills and experience. And the price for kayaking add-on is 2,995 Australian dollars for a month. So okay. Does anyone else have any questions that I can answer? Period. Peter just needs to convince Marion. Peter, and of course, okay, a good question. I'll just go 2 questions we've got here. Just need to convince you're a significant other or a friend or family member. We're happy to take phone calls to help convince anybody you would like. But in all seriousness, we're available. If you want to have a private call, give us a call or send us an email. We're happy to chat about it. Any concerns you've got about the trip, or what the suitability is, or just any questions at all you have about the voyage. So in terms of what level of kayaking you need, the fitter you are and the more experienced you are, the more you will enjoy the voyage, or the more opportunities you could have. It's really, we're quite limited in kayaking in terms of the weather. Once you get to around 20 knots, for all of us, guides included, it's still a challenging environment. So in terms of the level of kayaking, there is still time to prepare if you haven't paddled. It's more important that you're fit and active and mobile than you are an extremely good kayaker. So being able to get in and out of the boats, having some fitness, and if you're not already well versed in sea kayaks, having perhaps a preparatory session with ourselves or a reputable operator somewhere, that should be suitable enough. So it's not that you don't have to be a really good kayaker. It just, you need to be fit, mobile, and enjoy an active experience. And we can always help sort of guide your decision on any day on which outings you might choose based on your experience and preferences as well. But if you're ever unsure about your level of experience, you can give us a call, and I'm happy to talk through that with you personally. Okay, some really great questions coming in. Fantastic. Well, I'll give you a couple more minutes. If anyone else would like to ask any questions, please do. Otherwise, Gary, what's your favorite thing in the Ross Sea? What do you love about it?
I think what it is that the Ross Sea is more Antarctic, continental Antarctica than pretty much anywhere else you'll go. You had some nice images of big tabular icebergs. That's part of it. But even the sea ice is big. It's big pans of ice. During the winter, it's huge amounts of fast ice, and so when it breaks up, you can get these pans of ice that are half a kilometer in diameter, kind of thing. And you don't see that on the peninsula or around South Georgia area or something. And the transantarctic mountains are the backdrop to everything off in the distance. So it's quite an amazing place in Antarctica. I think is one of the things. I love being I'm a penguin biologist. I'm a scientist who studied penguins for many, many years. So I love walking around a really, really massive penguin colony, so wandering around Cape Adare or Cape Bird or any of the other places where there's a big Adelie penguin colony, that's where I like. Cape Bird is one place that is a possibility of a landing if you get shut out of some of the other places because of ice. And I actually spent 6 summers studying Adelie penguins at Cape Bird. So any trip that lets me get to Cape Bird is really wonderful to me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember when I first went to Antarctica and going to the peninsula, it's there's lots going on. It's a busy place. There's a lot of mountains, and it's and then loved it. It was amazing. And then the next one of my later trips went around to the Weddell Sea, and that expansiveness, just the spaciousness. And I to be honest, I've grown to love that.
Yes, and it's a similar feel. The Weddell Sea, on the peninsula side, the Weddell Sea is very similar to that. You got a question about equipment and clothing. Yeah, I'll say something about it. The Ross Sea is much colder than the peninsula. On the peninsula, we can tell people, if you're a skier, it's just ski gear basically, that you need for the peninsula. But you're likely to run into -10 at some stage on down in the Ross Island area, down in the deep Ross Sea. Obviously not in the subantarctics, but in the subantarctics, you're likely to get quite a bit of rain. So you clearly have to have full waterproof gear for that. And anytime you go into a Zodiac, you need waterproof gear. And then, of course, the kayaking gear, you have a dry suit that's waterproof anyway, so you'll be dealing with that. But yes, you have to be ready for about -10 and potentially even with 30 knot winds at -10, which is quite cold. So you need good gloves, you need good thermals, you need several layers, and so you do need pretty good equipment. Now, I know when you book, you'll get an equipment list that enumerates most of that stuff, but it is the Ross Sea is colder than other parts of Antarctica that people visit.
Yeah. And usually, you know, I guess often the next question is about the kayaking. What's the difference with the equipment with the kayaking? There really isn't too much in terms of the layers that you're going to bring anyway for the general outings. And then we've got the dry suit that goes on over the top. There's some, you know, some minor differences with some beanies and pogies, which we provide. Not the beanies, but the pogies, the hand covers to keep your hands warm, and some gloves maybe. But for the most part, whatever you're bringing for the general voyage is the same equipment, same clothing that you'll need for the kayaking, or same layers, I should say. I've just got a question here about the age range of kayakers. The majority of people are into their 60s already for kayaking, as well as the voyage itself. Yeah. So I think, yeah. I've had people as young as 8 and as old as 80 in Antarctica. We don't have anyone who's 8 on this voyage, and they don't. They just came for a little bit of a tryout one time. But I sort of say that with a bit of tongue in cheek. But it's not so much the age; it's more about the ability. Yes, as I said, most people are already into their 60s on these trips that we're doing. But we don't discriminate. Okay, well, I think we might nearly be there in terms of the questions. Guys, if there's anything at all that I haven't answered here, or we haven't answered, or you've missed, please feel free to email us. We'll follow up with the recording for those that missed out. And obviously we've got this recording you can share with friends or family if you so choose. And yeah, thanks again for coming along, and please be in touch if you have any questions. Thanks, Gary. Thanks heaps.
Thanks, everyone.
Time.
Thank you, Toby.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Fab. Yes, of course. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.